In August of 2009, 33-year-old financial analyst Jaime Dale from San Francisco went on a lonely hike in the Sierra Nevada mountains. He wanted to be alone, away from the city and people. 8 years passed, and while a group of geologists were exploring the dried-up Coyote Creek during a drought, they came across a human skeleton with a rock tied tightly to its feet. In his pants pocket was a driver's license in the name of Jaime Dale. In August of 2009, 33-year-old San Francisco financial analyst Jaime Dale took a short vacation. At the company where he had worked for almost a decade, he was known as a focused and cool professional. Colleagues recalled that in recent months he looked exhausted, hardly spoke, and often stayed late in the office. At the end of August, he suddenly announced that he was planning a few days on the road without a phone or work. That same day, he rented a black Mazda Tribute SUV and left his neighborhood for I-80, which leads east through valleys and mountain passes. His journey can only be traced in fragments. On August 28th, at 9 o'clock in the morning, cameras at a gas station near the town of Tracy captured a man in a dark jacket buying coffee and fuel. A few hours later, his car was seen near a roadside cafe outside of Bishop, a small town at the foot of the Sierra Nevada. That evening, he checked into the Mountain View Inn motel, took a room for one night, and paid cash. The manager recalled that Jaime acted calm but tired. He said he was going to the mountains to reboot and planned to return by the end of the week. The next morning, around 7, Jaime left the motel. He left his laptop, clothes, and most of his belongings in the room, taking only his hiking backpack, map, and camera. According to the employee who cleaned the room, there was a short note on the nightstand. "Do not disturb. I'll be back to get my things." After that, no one saw him again. On August 30th, at 7:45 in the morning, a traffic surveillance camera captured a black Mazda turning off the highway into the Sierra National Forest. About an hour later, his car was in a small parking lot near the beginning of the Lone Pine Creek Trail, a mountainous route rarely visited by tourists. This area was not officially monitored, and the visitor logbook was empty that day. The only witness who saw Jaime alive was a truck driver from a local contractor. The man was unloading equipment for the rangers nearby. He later said that he noticed a black SUV and a man with a backpack standing near the hood for several minutes, as if he was hesitating before moving deeper into the forest. He looked concentrated, the driver recalled, but not confused. He just looked like he was thinking about something important. When the rented Mazda did not return after 3 days, the rental company tried to contact the client. The phone was off and the email was unanswered. According to internal rules, they notified the police. The call about the suspicious absence of the rented car was received by the Inyo County Police Department on September 2nd at 9 o'clock in the morning. The police found the number of Jaime's sister, Jenny Dale, who lived in San Francisco, in the list of contact persons. She confirmed that her brother had not been in touch for several days and emphasized that this was not like him. In the evening of the same day, the Rangers drove to a parking lot near the Lone Pine Creek Trail. The car was still there, locked, with no signs of forced entry. Inside, they found a road map, a water bottle, and a plastic energy bar package. On the seat was an empty wrapper labeled Bishop Market. In the trunk were neatly folded clothes, a camping kit, and a first aid kit. The footprints on the ground near the car were partially blurred, but experts determined that the man had walked several dozen yards deep into the forest. Then the trail broke off. The search began the next morning. 12 rescuers with dogs and thermal imagers examined the trail, checking ravines, stream beds, and rocky slopes. They went nearly 10 miles inland and found only an old boot print similar to the model Jaime had. The dogs lost the scent on a rocky plateau where the trail seemed to break off. A few days later, volunteers joined the operation. They used a helicopter to fly over the forested areas, but to no avail. They found no evidence of an accident. There were no traces of a fall, torn equipment, or things that a frightened tourist might have left behind. It was as if the man had simply vanished into thin air. After 2 weeks of fruitless searching, when the daytime temperature began to drop sharply, the active phase of the operation was curtailed. The case was officially classified as a missing person. The report states, "The last confirmed trail is the Lone Pine Creek trailhead, further route unknown." Jaime's sister refused to accept this wording. She placed an ad in the local newspapers and created a small webpage asking those who might have been in the woods that day to come forward. Several tourists did come forward, but none had anything to add. The flow of visitors was minimal at the time. The rangers assumed that the man could have strayed from the route, gotten lost, and died of exhaustion. However, neither the body nor his belongings were found. One of the searchers later told reporters, "Such cases happen once a decade. A person goes to the mountains and just disappears. No struggle, no trace. The forest sometimes does not give up its own." This is how the first part of the story ended, with only a few facts and too much silence. A black Mazda in the parking lot, an empty visitor's log, and an invisible path leading deep into the mountains. In the late summer of 2017, California was experiencing its driest season in decades. The forests around Lone Pine were dull and dusty, the streams had dried up to a thin thread, and the air smelled of burning from distant fires. It was then that a group of geologists from the University of Reno arrived in Red Canyon to conduct field research on erosion rocks. Their goal was to study landslides after a series of summer earthquakes had swept through the region. The day they made their discovery was unbearably hot. Around 11 o'clock in the morning, the 5 researchers were working in the lower part of the canyon where Coyote Creek ran, a narrow stream that once fed the adjacent valley but had now become a dry, cracked strip of rock. A geologist named Ken Branson was hopping over a section of the channel when he noticed a shiny piece of cloth poking out from among the gray debris beneath his feet. At first glance, it looked like trash left behind by tourists, but the color was too bright dark blue, with a subtle nylon sheen. Branson bent down, touched the material, and felt a dense, rounded shape underneath. When he started to rake the stones with his hands, a pale human-like bone appeared along with the dust from under the pebble layer. His colleagues, hearing his exclamation, came closer. They carefully threw away several large pieces of debris, revealing a pelvic bone underneath and a spine a little further away in a fracture in the riverbed. The team stopped working and called the local sheriffs. By the time the police arrived, the geologists had cleared the surrounding area enough to see that the body was lying in a natural depression, as if it had been deliberately placed there while the water was still flowing. The skeleton was almost complete, face down, and a large stone block, a rounded stone weighing about 20 kilograms, was tied to both shins with a rope. The rope, although unraveled, was still held together. According to the forensic expert who arrived later, it was an old nylon rope, typical of camping kits from the early 2000s. The site was cordoned off. The Inyo County Sheriff, Stan Lerson, led the inspection of the site. Investigators noted that the body had been in the water for many years. The bones were covered with a thin layer of sediment, and some of them were cemented together. Nearby, they found the remains of a backpack torn at the seams, its zipper almost gone from rust. Inside, there were fragments of plastic utensils, a folding knife, and a piece of polyethylene with the logo of a travel brand that had long since disappeared from the market. Nearby were 2 metal fasteners that looked like tent buckles and a damaged carbine. The searchers worked until the evening. When the stones were completely removed, it became clear that the body could not have been there by accident. Someone had deliberately brought it into the riverbed and fixed it with a stone so that the water would hide the traces. It was done carefully, without fuss. During the examination of the pants, the experts came across a small waterproof document holder, a transparent plastic envelope closed with a zipper. It was in a torn inner pocket, and inside was a cardboard rectangle with a blurry image. When it was removed, it became clear that it was a California driver's license. Despite being in the water for many years, some of the text was preserved. It was possible to make out a name on it: Jaime Dale. Everyone present fell silent. Among the senior rangers, the name was familiar. The story of the missing San Francisco analyst had been mentioned more than once. His car was found nearby, but the man himself was not found. For 8 years, the case was in the archive, labeled inconclusive. After identification, the crime scene was covered with a large tent. A forensic scientist from Bishop, Dr. Laurent, arrived in the evening and began removing the remains. The procedure lasted several hours. Each bone was documented separately, photographed and packed in labeled bags. Everything that could be attributed to personal belongings, a watch fragment, a metal ring, a zipper fragment, was sent for examination. One of the geologists later told reporters, "When we realized that it was a man, the air became so quiet that even the wind stopped blowing. The silence was like it only happens in places where human voices have not been heard for a long time." The official sheriff's report appeared the next morning. It stated, "The discovery in the dried-up bed of Coyote Creek shows signs of violent death. A stone was tied to the skeleton's shins, a probable attempted drowning. The man was identified by his driver's license as Jaime Dale, who disappeared in August of 2009. Criminal proceedings have been opened under the article Premeditated Murder." The news instantly spread through the local media. Reporters came to Lone Pine, trying to get comments from the sheriff and eyewitnesses. But the police refused to provide details, limiting themselves to a statement about the resumption of the investigation. For most residents of the valley, it was a reminder that even years later, the desert can reclaim what was thought to be lost forever. Later, experts determined that the skeleton had been lying in the riverbed for at least 7 to 8 years. On the surface of the bones, there were traces of water grinding, characteristic of a long stay in a running stream. The stone tied to the legs was of a local origin, a typical fragment of granite that is easy to find in the valley. The rope left traces of compression on the bones, indicating that it was tied after death. When the remains were delivered to the bishop's morgue, the official identification was made using dental records stored in Jaime's dentist's database. The match was complete. 8 years of obscurity ended with one sentence in the report. Person identified. The cause of death is violent. The summer that had started out as dry and colorless turned into the beginning of a new investigation. And although the reports made it look like another case from the archives, for the canyon where the water once flowed, it was different. The land that had remained silent for almost a decade finally spoke. The skeleton, found in the dried-up bed of Coyote Creek, was transported to the Bishop morgue early in the morning of September 4, 2017. The transportation took place under the escort of the Sheriff's Department, as the body was considered key evidence in a potential murder case. Throughout the day, experts from the forensic laboratory worked non-stop. Each bone was cleaned of silt, dried, and photographed. All the items found near the remains were described in a separate catalog: fragments of fabric, buckles, a knife, a stone, a rope, and a plastic ID card that became the main proof of identity. Experts officially confirmed that it was Jaime Dale. The dental records matched indisputably. When the identification results reached the sheriff's office in Independence, the missing persons case was reclassified as a homicide. For Inyo County, this was a rare event, the solving of a long-standing case that no one expected to see in the news. The forensic examination lasted 2 days. Forensic expert Dr. Laurent wrote in his report that the cervical vertebrae showed microcracks characteristic of neck compression, either by hands or a noose. Several ribs had old fractures, probably inflicted before death during the struggle. The back of the skull had a dent similar to a blunt force trauma. These injuries could not have been accidental. The conclusion was unequivocal. The death was caused by asphyxiation, and the stone on his feet was tied after his death to hide the body. In his report, Dr. Laurent emphasized that the nature of the injuries indicated a short but fierce struggle. The attack probably occurred by surprise, and the victim tried to defend himself. A small crack was found on one of the phalanges of the right hand, a typical defensive fracture. There were no traces of rope on the wrists, so the man had not been tied up. This meant that the attacker acted quickly and had a physical advantage. On the same day, Detective Sarah Mendez was assigned to lead the reopened investigation. She had been with the department for less than 3 years, but had a reputation for careful and methodical work. Colleagues called her an archive hunter. Mendez often took on cases that others considered hopeless. In the sheriff's office, among the dusty boxes labeled "Cold Case," she found a thin folder with the name Jaime Dale on it. Inside were copies of reports, old photos of the black Mazda in the parking lot, and testimony from several rangers and the only eyewitness who had seen Jaime that morning. Most of the documents looked incomplete. The search had been unsuccessful, and the investigator at the time had reported back with a dry phrase, "Further movement unknown." Mendez looked through the pages one by one, making notes. From the first hours, it was clear that the story lacked not evidence, but attention. The search in 2009 was conducted in a hurry, relying only on a route map and superficial interviews. No analysis of the car's prints, no comparison of the tires. Everything came down to the assumption of an accident. She started with the obvious, contacting the missing man's sister, Jenny Dale. Now, in her mid-40s, she lived in the same house in the San Francisco area, worked as an accountant, and made no secret of the fact that she had been continuing her own search for years. After an official call from the sheriff's department, she agreed to meet. According to Jenny herself, the conversation with the detective lasted almost 2 hours. She described her brother as a calm, balanced person, obsessed with work, but without a risk-taking attitude. He loved order, never used drugs, and never gambled. Jenny recalled that he looked exhausted, but not broken before his vacation. He wasn't running away from life, she said. He just wanted to be alone. She also confirmed that Jaime had an expensive camping kit, a backpack, a new GPS navigator, a camera, a watch, things that were not found on his body. This led Mendez to her first thought. Someone had taken the most valuable things after the death. Returning to the station, the detective carefully studied the interrogation report of the only witness, the truck driver who had delivered the equipment to the Rangers that morning. His name was Nick Kramer. In an 8-year-old recording, he said that he had seen 2 cars in the parking lot, a black Mazda Tribute and a white Ford van with a damaged side and rust stains on the doors. No one was interested in this detail at the time. The van was considered random. Such vehicles were often used by contractors working in the National Forest. But Mendez marked this fragment in her notes with a red pen. Ford is a possible second party. She spent the next few days in the archives repository, reviewing all of the county's traffic violation reports from that period. Ford E-Series or Econoline vans were the most popular among local craftsmen and carriers at the time. But it was almost impossible to find a specific vehicle from 8 years ago without a license plate. Nevertheless, Mendez felt that the story had to continue. A short note appeared in her work journal. White Ford, possible intersection point. For her, it was not just a technical note, but the first hint that Jaime Dale was not alone in the parking lot off Lone Pine Creek Trail that day. Meanwhile, the morgue continued to work on the remains of the rope found on his legs. The fibers were subjected to microscopic analysis, but it was not possible to identify the manufacturer. The fabric had completely degraded. Scratches were found on the stone that looked like traces of friction against metal, possibly from a boat or a tool. All of these small facts were gathering into a chain that had no shape yet. But for Detective Sarah Mendez, they meant the main thing. Jaime Dale's death was not an accident or a freak accident. Someone was there when he was dying, and that someone left behind the first, almost imperceptible, but real trace in the story. The white van that was parked next to his car in the mountain sun that morning. The investigation, which had been stalled for almost a decade, took a new direction. After analyzing archival records, Detective Sarah Mendez focused on a single clue: a white van seen in a parking lot off the Lone Pine Creek Trail the morning Jaime Dale disappeared. The Inyo County Highway Patrol's archive from 2009 held hundreds of records, but most of them belonged to service or recreational vehicles. Mendez narrowed her search to older Ford Econoline models registered in small communities around the forest. After a few days of reviewing the data, she came across one match: a white van from the year of manufacture 1998, registered to Leo Worsham, a resident of the town of Olancha. The name didn't sound familiar, but a quick search of the police database revealed that the Worshams had two brothers, Leo and Kyle. The second one had a criminal record for petty theft, disorderly conduct, and participation in a fight at a roadside bar. They both lived in an old house on the western outskirts of the city and did temporary jobs repairing cars, transporting and delivering water to the mountainous areas. It was this profile that made Mendez take a closer look. The van, access to forest roads, and lack of a permanent job created the perfect conditions for appearing in remote places without any trace. Olancha greeted her with heat and silence. The town stretched along a highway where desert dust mixed with the smell of oil. Almost all the buildings looked like they had been there since the middle of the last century. Mendez started at a local bar that had a reputation for being the unofficial source of all the gossip within a 20-mile radius. The High Sierra Tap was a semi-dark wood-walled establishment where old photographs of hunters were interspersed with cracked beer brand signs. The bartender, an elderly man named Bill Rose, had worked here almost all his life. According to him, the Worshams had been frequenting the bar since before Kyle started getting into trouble. He described the brothers as the complete opposite of each other. Leo was silent, cautious, and tended to keep to himself. Kyle was hot-tempered, rude, and loved drinking and loud stories. According to the bartender, in the summer of 2009, Kyle mentioned several times that he had found something worthwhile in the mountains. At the time, everyone thought it was some old hunting cache or a forgotten campsite. No one took his word seriously. Mendez left a short note in the police notebook. Kyle talked about a find in the mountains. The time coincides with Dale's disappearance. She continued her search. The old Worsham house stood on the northern exit from town, behind a gas station, off the road leading to the desert. The windows were covered with plywood, and in the yard there were rusty cars without wheels, a skewed shed covered with ivy. A neighbor, an elderly woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Clark, said that Leo had lived there for many years, but after his mother's death, he sold the house and moved to a trailer outside of town. Kyle disappeared then too, she said. They said he went to Nevada, and Leo stayed behind, working in a garage somewhere, I think on the outskirts. That's how Mendez found out about Desert Sun Auto. It was off an old road, a few hundred yards from a trucker's motel. The garage looked shabby, but it worked. Inside, it smelled of grease, hot metal, and dust. Two mechanics were fixing a pickup truck, and a third stood by a toolbox, wiping his hands intently on a rag. When Mendez said her name and showed her ID, he became alert. It was Leo Worsham, a thin man in his 40s, with graying temples and hands covered in fuel oil. According to an employee who later told reporters, the detective and Leo had a brief conversation. Mendez asked if he had ever owned a white Ford Econoline van. The man, visibly tensed up, said he didn't remember and added that those days were long gone. When she asked him if he had been to the Sierra National Forest in the summer of 2009, he abruptly cut the conversation short and said that he hadn't been anywhere and didn't know anyone named Dale. He then turned around and went back to working under the hood of the truck. Garage workers later recalled that after Mendez left, Leo seemed nervous. He stood by the phone for a long time, smoked one cigarette after another, and went outside several times as if to check if he was being followed. His colleague described it as fear disguised as indifference. In her report, Mendez noted, "Leo Worsham's behavior is defensive, not aggressive, but alarming. Probable involvement or awareness of the events." After leaving the studio, she stopped at the same bar to review her notes. In a small town where everyone knew everyone, the Worsham's name was reluctantly mentioned. Locals preferred to avoid the conversation. Only one of the regular visitors, a former truck driver, said that he had seen Leo in the summer of 2009 driving a white van with a damaged side. He was giving his brother, Kyle, a ride to the lumber yard outside of Lone Pine. "They were like night and day," he said. "One was silent, the other was always talking. But I saw something strange in those eyes, as if they knew they had done something bad." This testimony was a turning point for Mendez. She realized that if Leo was nervous about simple questions, he didn't just know, he was afraid that the past was about to catch up with him. White vans do not remain without a trace, even years later. And somewhere in the dust of Olancha, among the rust and old metal, there must have been a trace of the car that in the summer of 2009 stood next to Jaime Dale's black SUV under the scorching sun in the parking lot near the Lone Pine Creek Trail. After Detective Sarah Mendez visited the Desert Sun Auto Garage, Leo Worsham stopped showing up for work. Colleagues recalled that he left the shop that evening without saying goodbye and did not return the next day or a week later. Someone saw him drive into the Whispering Pines trailer park on the outskirts of Olancha, where he had lived for the past few years, late at night, and then sit in his car with the lights on for a long time. Those who knew him said he looked distraught, as if he was waiting for something inevitable to happen. 2 days after the meeting with Mendez, the patrol stopped a white pickup truck on the outskirts of the city. The driver was behaving nervously, and the smell of alcohol was evident in the cabin. When asked to show his documents, the man introduced himself as Leo Worsham. The report states that he looked agitated and kept repeating, "I just need to leave, you don't understand." He was arrested for drunken driving and taken to the Inyo County Sheriff's Office. Mendez was already waiting there. For the first hours after his arrest, Leo was silent. He sat at the table, not looking up, only asking for water and a cigarette. When he was informed that the investigation had been resumed and that it was not a violation, but a possible murder, he was visibly embarrassed. According to one of the police officers, Leo looked as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders, but another, much heavier one had been placed on his shoulders. The interrogation report recorded his words, which became a turning point in the case. Leo said that in the summer of 2009, he and his younger brother Kyle traveled to the Sierra National Forest in their old Ford van. They took small jobs, delivering tools for contractors, hauling scrap metal, sometimes just collecting cans on the side of the road. That morning, they headed up into the mountains to find a place to set up a temporary camp. Kyle had heard that hikers often leave their gear in the area and wanted to make some extra money. According to Leo, they stopped at a small parking lot near the beginning of the Lone Pine Creek Trail. There was a black Mazda parked there, and a man in hiking gear was setting up a backpack next to it. Kyle immediately noticed the man's expensive clothes, watch, and camera. He told his brother that this guy is obviously not from around here and has money. Leo claimed that he tried to talk him out of it, but Kyle just laughed and got out of the car. In his testimony, Leo described the events that later coincided with the forensic findings. According to him, Kyle approached the stranger, allegedly offering to help him carry his belongings. When Jaime refused and tried to walk past, Kyle grabbed him from behind, at first just to stop him, but the man broke free. A short scuffle ensued. Kyle, who was physically stronger, pinned the victim to the ground and began to choke him. Leo said he stood by, not intervening, because it all happened too fast. After a few seconds, Jaime stopped moving. The protocol states that Leo spoke quietly, stopping constantly. He repeated several times that he didn't want it to happen and tried to stop his brother, but it was too late. When they realized that the man was dead, Kyle said they had to remove the body. Otherwise, it would ruin everything. They put Jaime in the back of the van and drove along a mountain road until they found a stretch of creek. There, according to Leo, Kyle decided to drown the body so that no one would find it. They dragged him to the water. Kyle took off his shoes and tied a large rock to his shins with a rope. Then he dumped the body into the deepest part of Coyote Creek, which was still flowing at the time. Leo admitted that he only helped to hold the stone and stood by. He claimed that after that, they started arguing. He wanted to leave immediately, but Kyle ordered him to take everything of value from Dale's belongings. They opened the backpack, found a camera, a GPS navigator, a few small items, and an expensive watch. Kyle took them for himself, and Leo, in his own words, couldn't get anything out of his head and took only a small folding knife, which he kept as a reminder. When asked about his motive, Leo said that his brother saw everything as a chance opportunity to make money. He found a rich tourist in the wrong place. When Mendez asked if he felt fear or remorse, Leo remained silent and then said only, "I knew it would catch up with me." Following this testimony, a search warrant was obtained for his home in the Whispering Pines Trailer Park. The trailer stood at the very edge of the site, next to a dried sage bush, covered in dust and cracks. Inside was an old camping knife with the letter J engraved on the handle. Later, experts confirmed that it was indeed a model produced by an outfitter, purchased by Jaime Dale in San Francisco shortly before his disappearance. According to the officer who conducted the search, Leo did not object and only asked to tell the detective that he could not keep silent any longer. His testimony became the first full description of the events of that August day. It showed that Jaime Dale had been the victim of a spontaneous but brutal attack, and that his body had been deliberately hidden in water after his death. For Detective Sarah Mendez, this meant that the main culprit was still at large. And now, the case has names, a motive, and the first indisputable evidence. After Leo Worsham's confession, Detective Sarah Mendez had not just a story in her hands, but a roadmap that led to a living person. Kyle Worsham's name now sounded like the main one in a case that had been in the archives for 8 years under the label Missing. It was he who, according to his brother, had strangled Jaime Dale in the Sierra Forest and then ordered the body to be disposed of. Mendez realized that time was running out. News of Leo's arrest could reach Kyle at any moment, and then he would disappear, as all those who have learned to live on the edge of the law do. The search began with phone connections stored in the mobile operator's database. According to the data obtained through the court, Leo had been in regular contact with a number registered in Nevada in recent months. The calls were short, mostly in the evening, with a repeated signal route to Carson City. After checking contacts and interviewing several people he knew in Olancha, it became clear. Kyle moved there a few years ago, works in warehouse construction, and lives in a rented trailer on the outskirts of town. Mendez moved to Carson City, where she joined the local police department. They developed a simple plan. First, check Kyle's work, schedule, and the places he visits regularly, and then prepare for an arrest. The construction site where he worked was located outside the city, in the middle of a deserted area where dust was constantly in the air like fog. His colleagues described him as a hard-working but gloomy man who did not like to talk about the past. He kept to himself, did not drink with the others, did not show his family, and did not use social media. Only in the evenings, according to the warden, he disappeared for several hours, leaving his work pickup truck outside the Dusty Spur bar. The bar was typical of such places: wooden walls, neon signs, a pool table, dim lights, and the smell of cheap whiskey. Kyle was there almost every night. According to a waitress who later testified, he would sit in the corner, order a beer, play pool, and hardly talk. But the detectives noticed something else, a watch shining on his hand, which stood out too much among his worn work clothes. The thin case, Swiss dial, steel band. These models cost tens of thousands of dollars and definitely did not belong to the Nevada construction workers. Mendez recognized the detail from the photos of the missing Jaime Dale. After a few days of surveillance, it became clear that it was too risky to act at work. Kyle was working alongside dozens of workers, and there were a lot of heavy tools on the premises. Even a small mistake could result in blood. Mendez decided to wait until the evening when he was leaving the bar. The police set up surveillance of the parking lot. One car was parked near the exit, and two more were on the neighboring street. That evening, Kyle arrived at the Dusty Spur around 8. After an hour at the pool table, he left, paying cash. According to the waitress, he behaved calmly, but looked back several times as if to check if he was being followed. When he got behind the wheel of the pickup truck and started to drive away, the police blocked the road. The arrest went smoothly. Kyle only tried to ask what was going on, but after hearing the words Jaime Dale's murder, he clenched his jaw and fell silent. During the initial search, police seized the same watch from his hand. Later, experts confirmed that it was a model purchased by Dale in San Francisco shortly before his disappearance. In the pocket of the pickup truck, they found a GPS navigator with a serial number that matched the description from Leo's testimony. Also found was a folding knife, similar to the one that came with the camping gear. Kyle's house, or rather an old trailer on the outskirts of Carson City, was searched the next day. The inside was a mess: scattered clothes, cans of food, boxes of tools. In a drawer under the bed, they found several items that confirmed Leo's story: an old map of the Sierra Forest, a gas burner bottle, a metal carbine, and a damaged camera case. There were no official documents, receipts, or proof of legal purchase of the watch. When he was taken to the police station, Kyle behaved confidently, even defiantly. He denied everything. He said he hadn't seen his brother in years, that he had bought the watch at a thrift store, and that he had found the GPS at a flea market. He claimed that it was another mistake by the police and that he had no reason to hide. Investigators noticed that he carefully avoided any details about the events of 2009, constantly changing the conversation to other topics. Kyle's behavior did not resemble a person who was confused. On the contrary, he looked prepared. According to one of the officers who attended the interrogation, he sat up straight, hardly blinked, and only once, when he was shown the found watch, his face twitched for a moment. Then he put on his mask of indifference again and said that he did not know what crime was being discussed. Watching him from behind the glass, Mendez realized that this man was lying not out of fear, but out of habit. In his every movement, she could feel the self-confidence of a man who had lived for many years next to crime and had learned to ignore it. But now she had something that the previous investigators lacked: a coincidence of testimony, physical evidence, and most importantly, a living thread between the two brothers. The arrest in Carson City was the first public step in a case that had remained a shadow in police archives for 8 years. The reports indicate that Kyle Worsham was taken into custody without incident, and that physical evidence was seized: a watch, a navigator, and a knife. Although he remained silent, the police knew that silence would not save him now. The story he had left behind in the Sierra Mountains began to catch up with him among the dust and concrete of Carson City buildings. Kyle Worsham was brought to the Carson City police station late at night. His hands were handcuffed, but he walked steadily with a straight back, like a man accustomed to showing no weakness. His face showed an indifferent calmness that hid tension. After the registration procedure, he was led to a small interrogation room with white walls, a table, and 2 cameras under the ceiling. The report reads, "The detainee is behaving calmly, cooperating formally, denying any involvement." At the beginning of the interrogation, Kyle chose the tactic of cold denial. He said that he had never been to the Sierra Mountains, that he had never heard the name Jaime Dale, and did not understand why he was detained at all. He claimed that he bought the watch at a thrift store in Reno, but did not remember the name of the store. He spoke steadily, sometimes with a subtle smile, as if he was talking not to a detective, but to a journalist who had falsely accused him of something ridiculous. Detective Sarah Mendez entered the room around 9 o'clock. She brought a folder with materials, old photographs, copies of examinations, several envelopes with evidence. She didn't raise her voice, spoke calmly, measuredly. First, she asked him about everyday things, where he worked, who could confirm his alibi, whether he had a family. Kyle answered briefly, sometimes with feigned surprise. When it came to his brother, he paused and said, "We haven't talked in years. Everyone has their own life." After a few minutes of silence, Mendez opened the first folder. On the table, she placed a photograph of a knife with a broken tip that had been seized from Leo's trailer. The metal glistened even in the black and white photo. "This item was found during the search," she said. "Your brother was keeping it. He claims it was yours." Kyle looked at the photo, shrugged his shoulders, and said he had never seen the knife. He added that his brother was making things up to make him look guilty. His voice became rude, and he hit the table with his fingers several times. Mendez didn't object, just put the photos back in the envelope and spoke calmly. "You say you didn't see the knife, but your brother described it to the smallest detail, even the scratch near the lock. And he also knows what you did that day." She didn't explain what Leo knew, but it was enough for Kyle to lean back and look away for the first time. He tried to look indifferent, but sweat beaded on his temples. The camera captured him swallowing, clenching his fingers, and closing his eyes for a few seconds. Mendez continued, changing her tone from neutral to softer, almost sympathetic. She talked about the man who was killed, about Jaime, his journey, the things found in the creek bed. Then she began to list details that only someone who saw everything with their own eyes could know. She described what the man was wearing that day: a light thermal jacket, a gray cap, and boots with red inserts. She said that he had a map with a marked route in his backpack and that there were signs of a struggle at the crime scene. Kyle listened without interrupting. Then Mendez mentioned the GPS navigator, the thing that Leo said started the fight. She said she knew Kyle tried to take it away when Jaime resisted, and that was when the fight happened. At her words, Kyle pursed his lips and shook his head slightly. This movement was not a response, but it was noticed by everyone in the glass observation room. Mendez then pulled out the last card, the one she had prepared in advance. She spoke slowly, recording every word. She described the stone, its shape, weight, the place where it was found, and even the type of rope, a nylon rope that used to be sold in camping kits. She added that the rope was tied with a special knot, a double sailor's knot, used only by those with experience with cargo or boats. Kyle did not answer. He sat motionless, his gaze frozen somewhere in the void. After a few seconds, he rubbed his face with his palm and stared at the table. His fingers gripped the edge of the metal surface until his knuckles turned pale. He was silent. Mendez did not repeat the question. She just waited. Witnesses who watched the interrogation later said that at that moment, the air in the room seemed to thicken. The camera captured Kyle opening his mouth several times as if he wanted to say something, but could not. Then he looks up and glances briefly at the photo of the knife that Mendez had left on the table. After that, he drops his hands and goes silent again. When Mendez asked if he wanted to exercise his right to a lawyer, he only nodded. The report states, "After the presentation of the materials, the detainee refused to give further testimony. External signs were severe anxiety, lack of response to clarification, and a change in voice tone." Kyle remained calm, but without the self-confidence with which he had entered the room. His legend was falling apart not because of the evidence, but because of one detail, a stone that no one but he could know about. He did not say a word, but his silence was the first real confession. The hearing in the case of State versus Kyle Worsham began in the spring of 2018 in the Independence District Court. The courtroom was small, wooden, with old benches and windows through which you could see the peaks of the Sierra Nevada. The press was moderately interested in the case. It didn't have a tinge of sensationalism, but it had everything that attracts documentary filmmakers: disappearance, family secrets, human weakness, and redemption that was almost a decade late. In the dock sat Kyle Worsham, a middle-aged man with short-cropped hair and gray prison clothes. His face was emotionless, with only wrinkles on his temples that made him look older than he was. Next to him sat a state-appointed lawyer. On the other side of the room were the prosecutor, Detective Sarah Mendez, and several officers who had been with the investigation from the beginning. At the front of the room was the victim's sister, Jenny Dale, wearing a black jacket and clutching the documents she had once handed over to the police. The prosecutor's office presented a solid evidence base. The case file includes the full testimony of Leo Worsham, the knife found, a GPS navigator, and Jaime Dale's watch. The most significant argument was the results of the examination of the rope that tied the stone. Experts found traces of DNA on its fibers that matched Kyle's profile. This was the last chain that closed the circle of evidence. The court hearings did not last long. After the first hearing, Kyle, after consulting with his lawyer, decided to make a deal with the investigation. He agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a reduced sentence. In the courtroom, he spoke quietly, without looking up. According to eyewitnesses, his voice was monotonous, devoid of emotion, as if he was retelling someone else's story. He admitted that his death occurred during an attempted robbery and assured that he did not intend to kill. In his statement, he said, "I only wanted to scare, but it went wrong." The prosecutor's office insisted that even if it was not a premeditated murder, Kyle's actions were deliberate, and the attempt to hide the body showed a full understanding of the gravity of the crime. The judge accepted the plea, but noted that no confession can bring back a life. The verdict was announced in April. Kyle Worsham was sentenced to a long term in a Nevada prison with no possibility of parole for the first 20 years. His brother Leo was the main prosecution witness. He was brought in under escort from the detention center. He confirmed all of his testimony and reiterated the events of that August morning. At the end of the trial, he was sentenced to a separate sentence of imprisonment for concealing the crime and obstructing the investigation. His punishment was much lesser, but according to the prosecutor, he will carry his burden further without shackles, but with memory. There is an entry in the court record. The defendant, Worsham Kyle, pleaded guilty in part. The motive is robbery. The aggravating circumstance is the violent death of the victim. The court recognizes the agreement with the investigation as valid. After the verdict was announced, the courtroom remained silent for several minutes. Jenny Dale, according to those present, did not cry. She just looked at the empty bench as if trying to understand whether her brother was feeling calmer. In a brief conversation with journalists after the hearing, she said only one sentence: "Justice has been done, but there is no peace, only a different taste of pain." A few weeks after the verdict, Jaime's family received permission to collect his remains. The crematorium in Bishop Stortford held a ceremony attended by only a few people: his sister, 2 of her friends, and a police officer. The ashes were kept in a small metal urn that Jenny later brought to San Francisco. There were still books, a camera, and a cup in his apartment that she couldn't throw away. She told her friends that she wanted to fulfill her brother's last wish, to have his remains scattered over his favorite mountains. In the spring, she went there herself. It was a quiet day in the Sierra National Forest. The wind barely swayed the pine trees, and the snow that still remained on the northern slopes glistened in the sun. She took out an urn, opened the lid, and poured the ashes into a stream that had been restored after a long winter. The stream was called Coyote Creek, the same one where his body had been lying for so many years. Officials say that Dale's case was one of the few in the state to be solved after 8 years of no trace. For the Inyo County Sheriff's Department, it was an example of how cold cases don't always stay cold, and for Detective Sarah Mendez, it was the first investigation she ever brought to a close. The silence that returned to the forest after the case was over was different. Not dead, but calm, one in which every breath reminded us that even among the mountains and stones, the truth can find its way to the surface as soon as the water dries.